What is up, you awesome kisters? It is CistReactZ. Before this video starts off, guys, gotta let you guys know that there is a new CistReactZ shirt that is on Teespring right now. Make sure you guys go check it out. Click the link in the description to get 40% off on your purchase. So yeah, and it is made by Carson V from Twitter, so make sure you guys follow him if you had one. Peace out.
Keep it on the level. Keep it on the level. I'm climbing up the. Keep it on the level. Keep it on the level.
What is up, you awesome kisters? It is CistReactZ, guys, and welcome back to yet another Twisted Ones reading video. So yeah, guys, here we go. Alright, so chapter 2. Anyway, guys, here we go. So, how are you enjoying your classes? Clay Burke asked in a jovial tone. Charlie gave him a sardonic look. Well, this is the first murder of the semester, so things have been going fine. Christ. So yeah, Burke didn't answer, apparently aware that further attempts to lighten the mood would fail. Charlie looked out the window. She thought often of going back to her father's house, but each time the memory of the place rose up, she slammed it back down with almost physical force, cramming it into the tiny corners of her mind to gather dust. Now something was stirring in the tiny corners. She feared that she might not be able to keep it away much longer. Chief Burke, Clay, how's Carlton been? He smiled. Carlton's doing great. I tried to convince him to stay close for college, but he and Betty were adamant. Now he's out east studying acting. Acting? Charlie laughed, surprising herself. Well, he was always a prankster, Clay said. I figured acting was the next logical step. Charlie smiled. Did he ever... She looked out the window. She looked out the window again. Did you ever talk about what happened? She asked with her face turned away. She couldn't see Carlton. She could see Clay's reflection faintly in the window, distorted by the glass. Carlton talks to his mother more than he talks to me, he said plainly. Charlie waited for him to go on, but he remained silent. Though she and Jessica lived together from the beginning, they had an unspoken pact to never talk about Freddy's, except in the barest terms. She didn't know if Jessica was sometimes consumed by the memories as she was. Maybe Jessica had nightmares too. But Charlie and Clay had no such pact. She took in shallow, quick breaths, waiting to hear how far he would go. I think Carlton has dreams about it, Clay said finally. It's like everyone's got a connection. Like, bad dreams, I understand, given what happened. Sometimes in the morning, he would come downstairs looking like he hadn't slept for a week. But he never told me what was going on. What about you? Do you think about it? She was overstepping, but Clay didn't seem ruffled. I try not to, he said gravely. You know, Charlie, when terrible things happen, you can do one of two things. You can leave them behind, or you can let them consume you. Charlie set her jaw. I'm not my father, she said. Clay looked immediately contrite. I know, I didn't mean that, he said. I just meant that you had to look forward. He flashed an nervous grin. Of course, my wife would say that there's a third thing. You can process the terrible things and come to terms with them. She's probably right. Probably, Charlie said distractedly. And what about you? How are you doing, Charlie? Clay asked. It was a question. She practically solaced. Guys, I can't read. It's like 2 a.m. 3 a.m. actually. She didn't know how to answer it. I have dreams about it, I guess, she muttered. You guess? He asked in a careful tone. What kind of dreams? Charlie looked out the window. Again, there was a weight pressing on her chest. What kind of dreams? Nightmares, but not about Freddy's. A shadow in the doorway of the costume closet where we would play. Sammy doesn't see. He's playing with his truck. But I look up. The shadow has eyes. Then everything is moving. Hangers rattle and the costumes sway. A toy truck drops hard on the floor. I'm left alone. The air is growing thin, and I'm running out. It's getting hard to breathe, and I'll die like this, alone in the dark. I pound against the closet wall, calling for help. I know he's there. Sammy's on the other side, but he doesn't answer my cries. As I begin to gasp, choking for air, it is too dark to see. But even so, I know my vision is going black in my chest. My heart is slowing. Each pump is swelling me with pain as I struggle to recall his name one more time. Charlie! Clay had pulled over and stopped the car without noticing. Now he was looking at her with piercing detective gaze. She looked at him for a moment before she could remember how to answer, and she made herself smile. I've been focused on school, she said. Clay smiled at her, but didn't touch her eyes. He looked worried. I would be too! He's wishing he hadn't brought me. Yeah. Why? How is this murder even connected to her? What, did someone carve Charlie in the chest? Anyway, he's wishing he hadn't brought me, she thought. He opened his door, but didn't get out of his car. The sun had begun to set as they drove, and now it was verging on dark. The turn signal was still on, flashing yellow onto the dirt road. Charlie watched it for a moment, hypnotized. She felt as if she might never move again, just sit there watching the endless, measured blinking of the light. Clay switched the signal off. Charlie blinked as if the spell had been broken. She straightened up her spine and unbuckled her seatbelt. Charlie, he said, not directly at her. I'm sorry to ask this of you, but you're the only person who can tell me this but you're the only person who can tell me if this is what I think it is. No. He doesn't think she killed him. Okay, she replied, suddenly alert. Clay sighed. God! And got out of the car. Charlie followed close to him. There was a barbed wire fence all along the road, and there were cows in the field beyond it. They stood around chewing and staring in the vacant way of the cows. Clay lifted the top wire for Charlie, and she climbed gingerly through it. When was the last time I got a tetanus shot? She wondered, as the barb caught briefly on her t-shirt. She didn't have to ask where the body was. There was a floodlight and a makeshift fence of caution tape strung between the posts that jutted from the soil in the scattered formation. Charlie stood where she was as Bert climbed through the fence after her, as they both surveyed the area. The field was flat. Oh crap, they're getting close. The field was flat and the grass was short and patchy, worn down daily by dozens of hooves. A single tree stood some distance from where the crime scene was marked. Charlie thought it was an oak. Its branches were long and ancient, heavy with leaves. There was something wrong in the air. Along with the smell of a cow, dung, and mud, wafted the sharp metallic scent of blood. For some reason, Charlie looked at the cows again. They weren't as calm as she'd assumed. They shifted back and forth on their feet, clustering in groups. None of them came anywhere near the floodlight, as if sensing her scrutiny. One of them lowed a mournful cry. Charlie heard Clay's sharp intake of breath. Sorry. Maybe we should ask them about what happened, Charlie said. In the stillness, her voice carried. Clay started to move toward the floodlight. Charlie followed closely, not wanting to fall too behind. It wasn't just the cows. A weight of something wrong hung over the place. There was no sound, only the shut quiet that followed a terrible violence. Clay stopped beside the marked out spot and ushered Charlie forward. Still saying nothing, Charlie looked. It was a man, stretched in a ghastly position on his back, his limbs contorted impossibly. In the glaring, unnatural light, the scene looked staged. He might have not been an enormous doll. His whole body was drenched with red blood. With red blood? Drenched red with blood! His clothes were torn, almost shredded. Though the holes, Charlie thought she could see ripped up skin, some bone and other things she could not identify. What do you make of it? I have an idea, but I'm not going to say it out loud. Clay said softly, as if afraid of disturbing her. I need to get closer, she said. Clay climbed over the yellow tape, and Charlie followed. She knelt in the mud beside the man's head, the knees of her jeans soaking with mud. He was middle-aged, white. His hair was short and gray. His eyes, thankfully, were closed. The rest of his face slack in a way that could have almost looked like he was asleep, but did not. She leaned forward to peer at the man's neck and blanched, but did not look away. Charlie, are you all right? Clay asked, and she held up a hand. I'm fine. She knew these wounds. I knew it! Spring wounds! Springed! That's why I read he was drenched with blood, holes and stuff, so yeah. And Charlie knows a lot about the spring suits and stuff, because her dad designed them. So yeah, Charlie, are you alright? Clay asked. She held up a hand. She's fine. She knew these wounds. She knew she'd seen these scars they left. Spring wounds. On each side of the dead man's neck was a... No, this isn't who I think it is. On each side of the dead man's neck was a was a deep, curved gash. This was what had killed him. It would have been instantaneous, but maybe not. Suddenly, she pictured Dave, the guard at Freddy's, the murderer. She watched him die. She triggered the spring locks, and seen his sterile eyes as the locks drove into his neck. She watched his body jolt and seize as the costume he wore shot jagged metal through his vital organs. God! Charlie stared at the stranger's wound. She reached down and ran a finger along the edge. Dang, she did? And ran her finger along the edge of the cut on the man's neck. What were you doing? Charlie! Clay said in alarm, and Charlie drew her hand back. Sorry, she said self-consciously, wiping her bloody fingers on her jeans. Clay, it was one of them. His neck. He died like... She stopped talking. Clay had been there. His son almost died in the same way. But if this was happening again, he knew what he was dealing with. You remember how Dave died, right? Clay nodded. Hard thing to forget. He shook his head, patiently waiting for her to get to the point. These suits, like the rabbit suit that Dave was wearing, they could be worn like costumes, or they could move around on their own as fully functional robots. Sure, you can put the suit on a robot, he said. Not exactly. The robots were always inside the suits. They were made of interlocking parts that were always held back against the inner lining of the costumes by spring locks. When you want an animatronic, you just trip the locks and the animatronic parts would unfold inside, filling the suit. But if there was someone inside the suit when the locks were tripped, Clay said, catching on. Right, that's the sharp metal parts shoot right through your whole body, like, well, that, she finished, gesturing at the man on the ground. How hard is it to accidentally trigger the spring locks? It depends on the costume. If it's well cared for, pretty hard. If it's old or poorly designed, it could happen. And if not for the accident, is that what happened here? So someone got spring locked and the body was left. Charlie hesitated. Dave's image came to her mind again. This time alive, when he bared his torso to show him the scars he bore. Dave had once survived being crushed like this, though the second time it killed him. Somehow he had survived the lethal unfolding of a costume. A thing that should have been impossible, but it had left marks. It left his marks. She cleared her throat and started again. I need to see his chest, he said. Can you get the shirt off? Clay nodded and took a pair of plastic gloves from his pocket and tossed them to Charlie. But they fell on the ground unnoticed. If I knew you were going to stick your fingers in the corpse, I had given you these to you earlier, he said dryly. He put on a pair of his own and produced a knife from somewhere on his belt. The man was wearing a t-shirt. Clay dropped to his knees, took a hold of the bottom, and began to saw through the cloth. The sound of wet, tearing fabric through the silent field, like a cry of pain. At last he was done, and he pulled back the shirt. Dried blood clung to the fabric. As Clay pulled back the body, as Clay pulled it back to the body, as Clay pulled it back, the body pulled with it. God! Giving a brief false sense of life. Charlie bent over, picturing Dave's scars. She compared the pattern to the wounds she saw here. This is what happened to Dave. Each piercing of the man's flesh seemed like a killing blow. Any one of them might have punctured something vital, or simply deep enough to drain him of blood in minutes. What was left of him was grotesque. It was one of them, Charlie said, looking up at Clay for the first time since they reached the body. He must have been wearing one of the costumes. It's the only way he could end up like this, but Charlie paused and scanned the field again. Where's the suit? What would someone be doing here wearing one of those things out here? Clay said. Maybe he wasn't wearing it unwillingly, Charlie answered. Clay leaned forward and reached for the man's open shirt, pulling it closed as best as he could. Together they got up and headed back to the car. As Clay drove her back to the campus, Charlie stared out the window into the darkness. Clay, what happened to Freddy's? She asked. I heard it was torn down. She scratched her fingernail on the car seat nervously. Is that true? Yes. Well, they started to, Clay said slowly. We went through the whole place, clearing everything out. It was a funny thing. We couldn't find the body of that guard, Dave. He paused and looked directly, because he's in Springtrap. He paused and looked directly at Charlie as though expecting her to answer for something. Charlie felt the warmth drain from her face. He's dead. I saw him die. Dave did this, didn't he? 'Cause he'd be coming back as Springtrap. 'Cause Purple Guy in the timeline would be coming back as Springtrap. Oh no. Charlie felt the warm drain from her eyes. He's dead. No, he's not. I saw him die. No, you didn't. Well, yes, you kind of did. She closed her eyes for a moment and forced herself to focus. That place was like a maze, though. Clay turned his eyes casually back to the road. His body probably got stuffed into some crevice and no one will find for years. Yeah, probably buried in the rubble. She looked down, trying to put the thought out of her head. What about the costumes? The robots? Clay hesitated. You must have known I would ask, Charlie thought, with some annoyance. Everything we took out of Freddy's was thrown away or burned. Technically, I should have treated it like what it was. A break in the missing kids case. Over a decade old, everything would have been bagged up and gone over. But no one believed what happened there, what he saw, so I took some liberties. He glanced at Charlie, the suspicious look gone from his face. She nodded for him to continue. Clay took a deep breath. I treated it as the murder of my officer. You remembered Officer Dunn. That guy is long dead. I don't even know who you're talking about. I recovered his body, closed the case, and I ordered the building to be demolished. Dang. What about Charlie paused, trying to not let her frustration show? What about Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy? What about the children who were killed and hidden inside each one of them? They were all there, Clay said gravely. They were lifeless, Charlie. I don't know what else to tell you. Charlie didn't respond. As far as the demolition crew was concerned, all they found were old costumes, broken robots, and 24 folding tables. More like broken folding tables, because Freddy broke them all. And I didn't correct them, he said, with hesitation in his voice. You know how these things go. Whether the building is up or tearing down, it takes time. From what I hear, the storm hit, and suddenly everyone was needed elsewhere. Someone else was needed elsewhere. The demolition was put on hold. So it's all standing there, Charlie asked, and Clay gave her a warning look. Some parts are standing, but for all intents and purposes, it's gone. And don't even think about going back there. There's no reason to go and get yourself killed. Like I said, everything that mattered is gone in any way, but I feel like that's a lie. I don't want to go back there, Charlie said softly. Yeah, because that's a lie, because, wouldn't Fazbear Fright in the timeline be created? And everything from the old location was brought to the FNAF 3 location, so so Clay's lying. He just doesn't want Charlie to go back there and remember. Everything's still there, if everything's still in the timeline course. I don't want to go back there, Charlie said softly. When they reached the campus, Clay led her out and where he'd found her. She had taken a few steps from the car. However, when he called to her from the car window, I feel like I need to tell you one more thing. We found blood at the scene in the main dining room where Dave. He looked around cautiously. There was something unseemly talking about gruesome things on the sheltered grounds of the campus. It wasn't real blood. Charlie. What are you talking about? Charlie took a step toward the car. It was like costume blood. Or movie blood. It was convincing, though. We didn't realize it was fake until the crime lab looked at it under a microscope. Why are you telling me this? 'Cause Dave's doing it! Oh, and a chapter. Okay, we're gonna read a little bit of chapter 3. Charlie asked, although she knew the answer. The terrible possibility was pounding at her mind like a headache. He survived once, Clay said plainly. Well, he didn't survive a second time. I'm sorry to have you involved in this, Clay said. Charlie didn't answer. She looked down at the pavement and clenched her teeth. Clay raised the window without another word. He drove away. Oh, God! Dave can't die. Because if you guys remember Sister Location, Michael or Dave, purple guy can't die. Oh! Oh, it's not. Dave can't die. I remembered that. Oh, no. Oh, okay. Give me a second to fix that. Alright, we are back. Charlie checked her watch. She was on time to meet John, even early. She passed under a street light and looked down at herself, checking her clothes. Oh no, the knee on her jeans were wet with mud, and there was a dark stain where she had wiped her fingers to... Oh. Wiped her fingers clean to the man's blood. Can't show up covered in blood. He's seen me like this too many times already. She sighed and turned around. Thankfully, Jessica was gone when she checked back to the room. Charlie didn't want to talk about what just happened. Clay hadn't explicitly told her to keep it a secret. She was fairly sure she shouldn't broadcast her private visit to a crime scene. Charlie cast a glance at the faces under their pillow case cover. But didn't go to them. She wanted to show her project to John, but like Jessica, he would not understand. She opened a dresser drawer and stared down at the contents without registering them. In her mind, she saw the body again, its limbs splayed out. All this stuff is just traumatizing her, bro. All this new extra crap. And stared down at the contents without registering them. In her mind, she saw the body again, its limbs splayed out as it has been thrown down where it lay. She covered her face with her hands, taking deep breaths, but she had seen the scars. But she had never seen the wounds of the spring-locked flesh. Now Dave's eyes came to her, the look of shock just before he fell. Charlie could feel the locks in her hands, feel them resist, then give away and snap. That's what happened. That's what I did. She swallowed and slid her hands down to her throat. Charlie shook her head like a dog shaking off a wet coat. She looked at the drawer. She looked at the open drawer again, concentrating. I need to change. What is all this? The drawer was filled with brightly colored shirts, all unfamiliar. Charlie startled, a dim panic seizing her. What is all this? She picked up a t-shirt and dropped it again, then forced herself to take a deep breath. Jessica. They're Jessica's. She opened the wrong drawer. Get it together, Charlie, she told herself sternly, and somehow it sounded like Aunt Jen's voice in her head, despite everything that lay between her and her aunt. Just imagining her cold, authoritative voice made Charlie a little calmer. She nodded to herself, then grabbed what she needed, a clean t-shirt and jeans. She dressed hurriedly, then left to meet John, her stomach fluttering, half excited, half sick. A date, she thought. What if it doesn't go well? Worse, what if it does? Worse, what if it does? As she neared the Thai restaurant, she saw John was already there. He was waiting outside, but he didn't look impatient. He didn't spot her right away, and Charlie slowed her pace for a moment, watching him. He seemed at ease, gazing into the middle of the distance with a vague, pleasant expression. He had an air of confidence he hadn't possessed a year ago. It wasn't that he'd been unsure of himself then, but now he looked adult. Maybe it was because he had gone straight to work after high school. Maybe it was what happened last year at Freddy's. Charlie thought with an unexpected sense of envy, although she moved out on her own, to a new house, to a new home, and a new college. She felt as if the experience had left her more a child, not less, not a cared for or protected child, but one who was vulnerable, God, and more. Sorry, guys. Again, just mid-morning reading, kill me. A child who looked under the bed and seen the monsters. John noticed her and waved. Charlie waved back and smiled, the expression unforced. Date or not, it was good to see him. How was your last class? He said, by way of greeting, and Charlie shrugged. I don't know, it was class. How was the rest of work? He grinned. It was work. Are you hungry? Yes, Charlie said decisively. They headed inside and were motioned to a table. Have you been here before? John asked, and Charlie shook her head. I don't get out much, she said. I don't even come out of this town that often. The college is sort of its own little world, I can't imagine, John said cheerfully. Now that the secret was out that he wasn't in school, he'd apparently shed his earlier discomfort. Isn't it a little bit? He searched for the words. Doesn't it feel a little isolated? Not really. Not really. It's a prison, if not one of the worst. I don't mean to compare it to a prison, John said. So come on, what are you studying? Charlie hesitated, but there was no reason not to tell John. But it seemed too soon, too risky to announce that she was eagerly following in her father's footsteps. She didn't want to tell him that she was studying robotics until she had some idea of how he would respond, just like with her project. Most colleagues make you do a set of classes your first year, English, math, everything like that. She said, hoping it would sound like a response. Suddenly, Charlie didn't want to talk about school. She wasn't sure if she could keep up a conversation about anything, really. She looked up at John, and for a moment, she imagined the spring-lock wounds in his neck. Her eyes widened as she bit off the inside of her cheek. Trying to ground herself. Tell me about your job, she said, and she saw her own hesitation, mirrored on his face. I mean, I like the work, he said. More than I thought I would, actually. There's something about... He doesn't like the job. Come on now. I just know this. There's something about doing physical labor that frees my mind. It's like meditation. It's hard, though, really hard. Construction workers always make it look so easy, but it turns out it takes a while to build up that kind of muscle. Well, yeah. Gonna be carrying lots of things. He stretched out his arms comically over his head, and Charlie laughed, but it couldn't help noticing that he was clearly well on his way to that kind of muscle. Uh-oh. John leaned to his left and gave his armpit a quick sniff, then made a look of mock embarrassment. Charlie looked down at her menu and giggled. Do you already know what you want? She said. Then the waitress appeared out of nowhere as if she'd been listening nearby. John ordered, and Charlie froze. She said it just to say something, but she didn't know what to get. Suddenly, she noticed all the prices. Everything on the menu was impossibly expensive. She hadn't thought about money when she accepted John's invitation, but now her mind jumped to her wallet and her nearly empty bank account. So how are you finna pay for that college bill, though? I mean, misreading her expression, John leaped in. If you never had Thai food, pad Thai is good, he suggested. I should have asked, he said awkwardly. If I'm buying a lady dinner, I should make sure she likes the food. He looked embarrassed, but Charlie flooded with relief. Buying a lady dinner. That's the only part she heard. No, I'm sure I'll like it, she said. Pad Thai, thanks, she told the waitress, then gave John a mock glare. Who are you calling a lady? She said playfully, and he laughed. What's wrong with that? It just sounds weird, calling me a lady, Charlie said. So anyway, what do you do all day besides meditate? Well, the days are long, and like I said, I'm still writing. So there's that. It's strange being in Hurricane again. I didn't mean to put down roots. Put down roots? Like join a bowling team or something, ties to the community, things like that. Charlie nodded. She of all people understand that to remain apart. She of all people understood the need to remain apart. Okay, why did you take the job here then? I know they needed people because of the storm, but you didn't have to come, right? People are building things in other places. That's true, he admitted. To be honest, it was more about getting away from here, where I was. Sounds familiar, Charlie muttered. Too softly for me to hear. The waitress returned with their food. Charlie took a quick bite of rice noodles and immediately burned her mouth. She grabbed her water glass and drank. Yikes, that's hot. Yeah, I mean, you just got the food. I mean, it's making me hungry. So what were you getting away from? She asked the question casually, as if the answer would be too simple. Do you have nightmares too? Everyone has nightmares. That's traumatizing. She held back the words, waiting for him to speak. A girl, actually, he said. He paused searching for a reaction. Charlie stopped chewing. That wasn't at all the answer she had been expecting. She swallowed, nodding with half self-conscious enthusiasm. After an excruciating silence, John went on. We started dating the summer after Freddy's. I told her I wasn't looking for anything serious. She said she wasn't either. Then suddenly, it was 6 months later, and we were serious. I had just started working, and I moved out on my own, and had this grown-up relationship. It was a shock, but a good one, I guess. He stopped, not sure whether he should continue. Charlie wasn't sure she wanted to give him permission. So tell me about her, she said calmly, avoiding eye contact. Eek. She was, I'm not dating her, but it's not like she's dead. Her name was Rebecca. She's pretty, I guess, smart. She's a year older than me. A college student studying English, has a dog, so yeah, she was alright. What happened? I don't know, he said. Really? Charlie said dryly, and he smiled. No, I felt on guard around her, like there were things I couldn't tell her, things she'd just never understand. It was because of her. It wasn't because of her. She was great, but she knew I was holding something back. She didn't know what it was. She thought you were probably cheating. I wonder what it could have been, Charlie asked quietly. The question was rhetorical, but they both knew the answer. John smiled. Well, anyway, she broke up with me and I was devastated, blah, blah. Actually, I don't think I was devastated. John looked down, focusing on his food, but not touching it. Dang, son, I got deep. Have you ever tried to tell anyone about Freddy's? John glanced back up and... Eek. Straight to the point. John glanced back up and pointed his fork at Charlie. She shook her head. It wasn't just what happened, he went on. I can't imagine telling one that story and having her believe me, but it wasn't only that. I wanted her to know the facts of it. But more, I wanted to tell her what it did to me. How it changed me. It changed all of us, Charlie said. Yeah, and not just last year. From the beginning, I didn't realize until after we'd all gone back how much the place had just followed me. He glanced at Charlie. Sorry, it must be weird for you. It must have even been weirder for you. Charlie shrugged uncomfortably. Maybe. I think it's just different. Her hand resting on the table beside the water glass, and John reached out to touch it. She stiffened, and he drew back. Sorry, he said. I'm sorry. It's not you. It's not you. It's just me and that place. It's not you, Charlie said quickly, his dead face, the dead skin of his throat. She had barely noticed it at the time, overwhelmed by the whole experience. By now, the feeling of the dead man's neck came back to her. It was as if she were touching him right now. Oh, God. Yeah, all this stuff, man. This is not good for her health. She could feel his skin, slack and cold, and slick with blood. She could feel the blood on her fingers. She rubbed her hands together. They were clean. She knew they were clean, but she could still feel the blood. You're being dramatic. I'll be right back, she said, and got up before John could respond. She made her way around the table to the bathrooms at the back of the restaurant. It was a 3-stall bathroom. Thankfully, it was empty. Charlie went straight to the sink and turned the hot water on full blast. Again with the hot stuff. You gotta be careful, Charlie. I'm trying to look out for you. She pumped the soap onto her hands and scrubbed them for a long time. She closed her eyes and focused on the feeling of hot water and soap, and slowly the memory of blood faded. As she dried her hands and looked at herself in the mirror, her reflection looked wrong somehow off, as if it wasn't herself she saw, but a copy, someone else dressed as her. Get it together, Charlie, she thought, trying to hear the words in Aunt Jen's voice, as she had before. She closed her eyes. Get it together. When she opened them again, she was back in the mirror. Her reflection was her own. Charlie smoothed her hair and went back to the table where John was waiting for her with a concerned expression. Is everything okay? He asked nervously. Did I do something? Charlie shook her head. No, of course not. It's been a long day, that's all. There's an understatement. She glanced at her watch. Do we still have time for a movie? She asked. It's almost 8:30. Yeah, we should go. Are you done? Yeah, it was really good. Thank you. She smiled at him. The lady liked it. Oh, okay. I see they get a little intimate. John smiled back, visibly relaxing. He went to the counter to pay, and Charlie went back outside, waiting for him on the sidewalk. Dark had fallen, and there was a chill in the air. Charlie wished briefly that she thought she'd bring a sweatshirt. John joined her after a moment. Ready? Yeah. Where is it? He looked at her for a moment and shook his head. The movie was your idea, remember? He laughed. Like I said, I don't get out much. Charlie looked down at her feet. The theater is only a few blocks away. They walked in silence for a while. I found out what happened to Freddy's, she said without thinking, and John looked at her surprised. Really? What happened? They were tearing it down, then the storm came, and everyone got called away. Now it's just staying there half collapsed and all the stuff is gone. No, it's not. She added, seeing the question in John's eyes. I feel like it's not gone because you guys remember the Fazbear's Fright and how they found everything there and then put it in a new horror thing. I don't know what they did with them. It was a lie. Charlie couldn't tell him what really happened without telling him how what had really happened without telling him how she knew. All those questions led back to the same place. The dead man in the field? Who were you? What about your father's house? John asked. Did you ask your Aunt Jen about it? What's she gonna do with it? I don't know, Charlie said. I haven't talked to her since August. She fell silent, not looking at John as they walked. They reached their destination, a shabby one-screen movie theater named the Grand Palace. Its name was either ironic or wishful thinking. Emblazoned on the marquee was their current showing, Zombies vs. Zombies. That's kind of messed up, don't you think? I think it's about zombies. John joked as they went inside. The movie had already started. Someone on screen was screaming as what were apparently zombies came after her from all sides. She was surrounded. The creatures crouched like wild dogs, ready to spring and devour her. They moved into attack, and a man grabbed her arm and pulling her to safety. Charlie. John touched her arm, whispering, "Over there." He gestured to the back row. The place was half full, but the back row was empty, and they made their way furtively to the middle. They sat, and Charlie turned her attention onto the screen. Thank goodness, maybe we can finally relax. She settled back in her seat, letting the images on screen blur past her. Shrieks, gunfire, thrumming music filled the silence between them. From the corner of her eye, she saw John glance at her nervously. Charlie focused her attention onto the movie. The main characters, a man and a woman, the generic, angular good looks of this big screen, were shouting automatic weapons into a crowd of zombies, as if the first ranks were stopped, through severed in half by guns. They still twitched on the ground. The ones behind climbed over the falling cohorts. The camera switched back to the man and the woman, who jumped to a fence and took off running. Behind them, the zombies kept coming, struggling forward, oblivious to the undead bodies they waded through. The music was urgent, the bass line pounding like an artificial heartbeat, and Charlie relaxed against the seat, letting herself be absorbed into it all. What was he doing there? The image of the dead man returned her. Something about the wounds bothered her. Yeah, like, maybe it was David playing dead, or maybe David did it. Anyway, something about the wounds bothered her, but she hadn't been able to put a finger on it. I recognized those wounds. They all matched what I remembered, but something was different. What was it? Oh, snap. So maybe, like, David, like, did those wounds over again? Or something? To, maybe as a message? I don't know. They all matched the ones I remembered, but something was different. What was it? She sensed movement next to her, and John trying to stretch his arm toward her. Really? She thought, I know, right? Do you have enough room? She asked him, and scooted away without waiting for a response. He looked embarrassed, but she glanced away, planting her elbow on the other armrest and staring fixedly at the screen. Enough room. That's it. She closed her eyes, concentrating on the image in her head. The wounds were slightly larger and spaced out. The suit he was wearing was bigger than the suits from Freddy's. The man was probably 5'10" or 5'11", which means the suit must have been at least 7 feet tall. On screen, there was quiet again, but it was short-lived. Charlie watched, mesmerized, as the dirt spilled away of its own volition, moving like magic as the zombie rose. It wouldn't be like that, Charlie thought, definitively. It's not easy to get out of his grave. By now, the zombie on screen was halfway out, crawling to the surface. Yeah, I had to add a little... crawling toward the surface, looking around with its glassy, mindless eyes. You can't get out that fast. Charlie blinked and shook her head, trying to stay focused. Zombies, lifeless things. The closet was full of costumes. Why are they doing this? This is bogus. Lifeless yet ever watching, with plastic eyes and dead hanging limbs. Somehow their corpse-like stares had bothered her or Sammy. They liked to touch the fur, but sometimes they put it to their mouths and giggle at the funny way it felt. Some was old and some matted, some new and soft. The closet was their place, just for the two of them. Sometimes they babbled together in words that they in wars that had meaning only to them. Sometimes they played side by side, lost in separate worlds of make-believe, but they were always together. Sammy was playing with a truck when the shadow came. He ran back and forth on the floor, not noticing that their ribbon of light had been cut off. Charlie turned and saw the shadow so still he could be an illusion. Just as the costume out of place, then a sudden movement, the chaos of fabric and eyes, the truck clanked as if it fell to the floor, and then loneliness. A dark so complete that she began to believe that she'd never seen it at all. The memories of sight had only been a dream, a trick of utter blackness. She tried to call his name. She could feel him nearby, but all she could feel were solid walls. Could you hear me, Sammy? Let me out. Sammy! But he was gone. And never seen there again. Alright guys, so yeah, that was like half of chapter 3, I think. Anyway guys, if you guys like this Twisted Ones video, make sure you guys hit that like button, comment below, subscribe for more Comic History Day, and let me know if you guys want me to read more of this. Peace out.